All right, we've got this video here. Piers Morgan interviewed Cenk Uygur about the Israel-Hamas war and the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelites. So, Israelis, I know. So, I'm kind of curious to see how this goes because Piers Morgan has been generally charitable to many of the guests that he's had on. I think unless the guests themselves become extremely combative. And he's picked, combative guests. But I think that this interview should be rather interesting. So let's dive into this one.
Well, joining me now to discuss this is the founder of the world's most influential progressive online channel, The Young Turks, a Democratic presidential hopeful. That's Cenk Uygur. Cenk, great to have you on the programme. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. I've been following your tweets with interest this week. You've been getting increasingly angry, I think it'd be fair to say. You said, I'm now enormously frustrated by US and Israeli government's barbaric acts in Gaza. I will not be shy in sharing that opinion on Piers Morgan's show today. Why are you so frustrated?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I didn't expect the framing that you put on this segment, and it's framing like that. That's disgusting. So I don't see what this has anything to do with anti-Semitism. I formed Young Turks and TYT with two Jewish friends who are some of my friends growing up. We've known each other and been brothers for over 40 years now. So I think what Hamas did is disgusting. I cry for those Israeli innocent civilians. But do I see you guys crying for Palestinians? I mean, Chris Christie was just on here treating it like it's no big deal because Palestinian lives don't matter. I think the real bigotry here is saying that Palestinians, we can kill 3 times as many of them already. And this is the appetizer. Netanyahu and his barbaric government have not even started the entree of murder and death and mayhem they're about to do. And that's
what? Hold on. So there are a couple things. First of all, when he's saying there's a times multiplier of Palestinians getting killed in comparison to those in Israel, that's all based on Hamas cumulative numbers, and we don't have any alternative numbers. So it is widely even accepted at this point that Hamas is sort of cooking the books. They're inflating the death toll. That is highly likely. It doesn't mean that Israel isn't killing civilians, but they are probably not killing as many civilians as Hamas is saying have been slaughtered. And I don't know if Cenk Uygur is making it sound like Netanyahu is going around being like, oh, we're going to kill tons more Palestinians. Let's go. No. This entire situation, he has instructed the IDF, and the IDF has complied with this. They have continually targeted Hamas. They have not targeted civilians, and that's the main difference, I think, between Hamas and the IDF. Because, you could make the argument, right, that they both are killing civilians, so they're both bad. Well, the problem is that, first of all, Hamas has been actually torturing civilians, beheading them, setting them on fire, shooting them as they're driving away, while the IDF has mostly just been dropping bombs on buildings that have, yes, civilians, but also Hamas terrorists inside. Now, the goal is to get rid of Hamas. How are you supposed to get rid of Hamas if you're not either doing a ground invasion where you're taking them out with a boom headshot or dropping bombs on the buildings in which they reside? You have to do one or the other. Let's be honest. You have to do one or the other if you're going to defeat Hamas. And hey, if Hamas is using, people as human shields, that blood is on Hamas's hands. It's not on the IDF's hands. You can't blame Israel for Hamas using human shields, right?
It's somehow okay killing 3 times as many Palestinian civilians, let alone the occupation, which is bigotry by definition. We say that everyone in the world can defend themselves, can have their own state, can have sovereignty, except the Palestinians. And the reasoning behind that is the Palestinians are what? They're what? The idea is that they are savages and that Muslims are too violent and cannot control themselves. So they must be occupied for 56 brutal, disgusting years.
I don't know. I mean, as I understand it, and I do admit, right, I have a lot more research to do. But as I understand it, it wasn't even Israel that went and conquered the land. It was the UN and Britain that said, hey, this land belongs to Israel, to the Jews, Israel, we're giving this to you. So they went and created Israel, I think in 1948. But then after that, not long after, you have violence from Arabs against Jews. And then you have these things called intifadas, where there are wars that the Arabs there started with Israel in an effort to take back the land that the UN had given to the Jews. And when they did that, they kept on losing land. So Israel hasn't been marching onto the Palestinians, stealing their land slowly over time, as many charts would show. This is just the result of the Arabs, trying to start wars and then losing those battles. And Israel has, to their credit, also given some land back. They gave Gaza back to the Palestinians, and now we see what's happening. Hamas is running rampant in there, and they're an evil terrorist organization. Their mission is to wipe Israel off the face of the map. And Cenk Uygur wants to talk about the sovereignty of nations. Does Israel have any sovereignty, or does he want to see all of the Jews there just wiped out completely and forced to either be killed or move along to another Jewish state like New York?
So I've had enough of the bigotry against Muslims and Palestinians, and I need you to speak out against that instead of covering every outrageous, atrocious action of the right-wing government of Israel and going, oh, it's anti-Semitism. No, and there is global anti-Semitism. There's anti-Semitism here in this country. 2 synagogues were shot up, Pittsburgh and in Southern California. We fight against that all the time. But then whenever Israel is criticized, people go, oh, no, it's anti-Semitism. No, there's real anti-Semitism.
I think Piers Morgan needs to either Piers Morgan or Cenk Uygur needs to point out the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, because they're not the same.
Instead of attacking that, all you guys ever do is hide behind the veil of anti-Semitism. Do you know why Palestinians might not like Israelis? Because they've been oppressed for 56 straight years.
I hear you. And let me respond.
I also think that just jumping to justify the actions of Hamas is just not a good thing to do.
Not you guys. I don't think I fit into any neat fit on this issue at all. B, I've actually covered this story, I think, more fairly than most people. I've had many pro-Palestinian voices I've given a huge platform for. They've been getting enormous audiences, from Bassem Youssef to others, and I've done that quite deliberately because I think these voices are important to be heard, including yours. I certainly wasn't accusing you, by the way, or your organisation of anti-Semitism. I just think I have found it, as somebody who's always identified as liberal myself, I've found it very dispiriting to see people who call themselves liberals whose instant response, it seemed to me, to one of the worst terror attacks we've ever seen was to immediately side with the place where these attacks have been launched from. Now, I don't tar all Palestinians with the brush of being Hamas at all. And in fact, the sooner Hamas are out of there, the better for the Palestinian people and the world. But I just think the only human response you can have is, as you did, by the way, to your credit, is it was disgusting what happened on October the 7th. Now, the question then becomes, what is a proportionate response by Israel? Not just to the terror attacks of October the 7th, but obviously there is now a huge ongoing escalation in what has been, as you rightly say, a 56-year war, effectively, in varying degrees over that period.
I mean, yeah, he is asking the important question here, because if you have to find common ground first, that what Hamas did was wrong. Yeah, and also you have to find common ground in saying that Israel has a right to defend themselves. If you establish those two things, and the only question is, what can Israel do to defeat Hamas? Do they always have to abide by the rules of the road? Do they have to always abide by the laws of war? Or do they have some more leeway because of the horrific nature of Hamas's terrorist attack? Are there things that Israel's doing now that have violated the rules of war? I actually suspect that there might be, such as the siege. As I understand it, the siege is against the Geneva Conventions. This doesn't mean that I hate Israel or that I'm anti-Semitic or even that I'm anti-Zionist, because I do support the state of Israel existing, in some form on the planet Earth. But at the same time, it would be foolish to presume that Israel is being perfect in this scenario. It is foolish to presume that Israel is not going to do bad things and not going to do things wrong. Even people with good intentions do bad things. And this is a government. So I'm not sure that we should assume that even Israel has the best of intentions here. Although I will say Israel is comparatively, they're the good guys in comparison to Hamas.
And that's where I think I'm struggling to see how a ground invasion by Israel, with all that would entail, particularly mass deaths of Palestinian civilians, how that is going to do anything for any peaceful resolution to this. I think it will have the opposite effect.
I mean, it's the most precise way to kill Hamas. And I think that that's important. You're dropping bombs, like the IDF right now, they're dropping bombs on civilian homes filled with human shields. True. But if you have a ratio of like 100 people in a building and 2 of them are Hamas terrorists, that's not efficient. You're killing orders of magnitude more civilians than terrorists. That should not be the goal. And I think that if you're doing ground offensive, then as you're on the ground, you can find the Hamas terrorists and kill them and not kill as many civilians, unless the civilians decide to fight back for some reason. But, you know, if you're in a building, you go into a building that has 2 Hamas terrorists inside of there and they're using human shields, well, okay, maybe you kill like 5 at most civilians rather than all 50. And then you end up killing the terrorists as well. So I just don't buy into this idea that, you know, a ground invasion would lead to more civilian deaths than air bombings, where you're literally bombing entire buildings of people, versus a ground offensive where you're basically having strike forces going in to kill terrorists.
Yes. So let's take it one at a time. First of all, as you rightly point out, on Young Turks, we covered the atrocious actions of Hamas right from the get-go, and we condemned it as fully as anyone can possibly condemn it. Because not only are they killing those poor, innocent Israelis that didn't do anything, those little babies and the grandmothers, it's disgusting what they did. But on top of that, they're ruining the Palestinian cause. They've burned the moral high ground to cinders. And then on top of that, they smear.
I appreciate him saying that, because many people are acting like the cause the cause of the Palestinians is like as valid, when, you know, I think that they might still have a point to a degree, even though I don't agree with the Palestinian side. This just makes it seem like, well, if you give more land to the Palestinians, this is what they do. They run around saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They start cheering on terrorist attacks and the murder of innocents. They start up terrorist organizations that go and behead babies. Like, this is just really, really, really not a good look for Palestinians. And like you said, it kind of ruins the cause for Palestinians who want peace, but also want maybe a little bit more land or better living conditions in Gaza at the very least.
All people of Muslim background like myself. And then it unleashes this bigotry of anti-Muslim bigotry throughout the world that I'm sick of. So screw Hamas and their barbarism, okay? Now, in terms of a proper reaction, yes, you need to get those hostages out. So now let's look at I'm going to suggest what to actually do. I'm going to be constructive.
Should be interesting.
But first, let's look at the unconstructive solution that Israel had. Dropping bombs on residential buildings. 50 ambulances have been hit. 10 out of 25 hospitals don't operate anymore. The incubators are about to run out of energy. There's 45 babies.
I will say that I'm starting to doubt the claim that these hospitals are running out of energy, running out of power, because they've been saying this for like weeks now. They've been saying this for over a week. For over a week, they've been saying our power is going to run out in 2 days, right? They've been saying like, oh, the area is running out of water. We're going to be out of water in 2 days. Oh, we're going to be out of food in 2 days. Every single day, it turns out they're 2 days away from running out of power, water, and food. That's rather interesting, that we've been 2 days away from them losing all access to basic necessities, for a week now. That just seems a little bit improbable to me. And while I don't doubt that people are starting to begin to want of their basic necessities, with the concept of them being completely out, I think is just ridiculous, because we've not seen any mass reports of, civilians dying out of dehydration, civilians dying out of starvation, babies in incubators dying because they've ran out of power. Where are the reports of that? I'm not seeing any reports of that. So I am the more days that we hear news of, oh, we're about to run out of power, when it's been over a week now, the less inclined I am to believe those claims.
That might die.
Especially when Hamas has allegedly millions of tons of oil or 500,000 tons of oil or something hidden away in a cache. It's not like the area is lacking in oil, lacking in energy. Is that Hamas is stealing it and stashing it away for their own purposes, right? So they have resources that they can give to the civilians, but they refuse to do that.
10 out of 25 hospitals don't operate anymore. The incubators are about to run out of energy. There's 45 babies that might die today. The parents, I just read on CNN, are writing the names of the kids on their calves, on their legs, so that if they are killed in a bombing and they're mutilated, they can find their bodies. Imagine writing the name of your child on their legs so that you could find them in the rubble after Israel or any government drops a bomb on them. And I need the West to understand something.
I mean, that is extremely horrific. Even though I support the cause of Israel, that's extremely horrific. I'm pro-life, so things about people dying, especially like stories about kids dying, the babies getting killed, especially with the beheadings and everything. Those are that's the worst of the situation, I think. This is why I want the war to end as quickly as possible. War is awful. War is never a simple, clean, ethically pure thing that is done. People tend to violate the laws of war when it comes to actually engaging in conflict, and it leads to horrific things like this happening. And I do understand the fear of using more aggressive tactics, but we have to acknowledge the fact that you don't win a war with timidity, right? You win a war through aggression, especially when the conflict has already become active, it's already become hot. So I do understand how it's awful that we're probably going to see more babies die, more toddlers die and pass away in this whole situation, more elderly people die, more disabled people, more peaceful civilians on both sides are going to end up dying. But the fact of the matter is, if Israel does not step up their aggression against Hamas and force them to no longer exist, then what we're seeing now will just continue forever. There have always been bombs going back and forth between Israel and Palestine. Now, it hasn't been to this amount, and it hasn't been with this level of lethality, but there have been people dying in the conflict every single year. Why? Because Israel is adopting timid tactics when it comes to combating Hamas's terror, and they've refused to root out this evil from Gaza for far too long. In a way, it is kind of the fault of the Israeli state that Hamas is still around. They should have taken care of this a long time ago. Now people are starting to see the urgency, and hopefully this leads to the IDF getting rid of them as swiftly as possible. But we'll see.
Bombs kill people. And do you know how they kill people? They incinerate them alive, or their heads explode. So what happened in Israel was a disaster and disgusting. But you have to be equally honest and equally outraged at the immorality of incinerating babies and grandmothers and aunts and uncles, which is what we're doing right now. America cannot keep sending aid for death and destruction. Enough of the occupation.
But how do you beat Hamas without killing people? That's the part where, to me, I just don't understand.
End it today. End it today. It's monstrous. Okay, I'm going to
Cenk, let me ask you this.
Solution.
I completely understand your passion and your anger. I completely get this. I, like you, want to see some resolution at the end of this horror that we're witnessing. How do you get rid of Hamas if you don't do it the way Israel are currently doing it? How do you actually eradicate what has become a nihilistic ISIS-style terror group who've quite deliberately, in my estimation, committed an outrage of such appalling scale that they knew that this would goad Israel into this kind of response? So why they did that, what is motivating it, who might be putting them up to it, who's helped them prepare for this, these are all questions we don't know the answers to yet. But it seems to me that Israel could, if it's not careful, be being lured into a massive trap here. And I hope that is not the case. But I'm curious, how do you get rid of Hamas if you don't do it the way Israel is currently doing it, albeit with horrific collateral damage in the face of thousands of innocent Palestinians being caught up in the bombing?
Yeah. So let me give you a short-term answer, long-term answer. And a lot of people are not going to like these, but these are realistic ways that you minimize civilian casualties. You do what...
But the goal should not be minimize civilian casualties. That should be one of the parameters that you use when picking a decision, right? You pick the one that causes the least death to civilian the least death to peaceful civilians. But the goal should be getting rid of Hamas. If you're picking a strategy here that doesn't have any civilian casualties, but also doesn't get rid of Hamas, that's an L. And that leads to more death in the long run.
America did with the Osama bin Laden raid. We didn't go drop a nuke on Pakistan. We didn't go destroy 6,000 residential buildings in the middle of Pakistan. We sent in special forces. Is it more dangerous to the special forces? Of course. That's the point of...
So what's the difference between that and a ground invasion? I'm a little bit confused. Are special forces, are they smaller units?
Special forces. Try to find the hostages. Does it look like Israel's trying to find the hostages? If I have a family member that's a hostage, I'm disgusted by what Netanyahu's doing now.
I agree with him on the hostages. And, you know, they are actually very mad at Bibi Netanyahu. I'm hearing rumors that Bibi Netanyahu is actually afraid to speak to the parents of the hostages because he's worried about what their response would be.
How do you know they're not in the buildings you're dropping bombs on? How do you know they're not in the tunnels you're dropping bombs on? How do you know they're not in the hospitals you're dropping bombs on? So this, if you want the hostages rescued, every rational human being can agree this is not the way to do it.
I would say that the priority, though, should be getting rid of Hamas. If you have to forego rescuing hostages in order to get rid of Hamas, you take the option that gets rid of Hamas, because then you don't have to deal with any more hostage situations again. And you don't set a precedent that for Hamas where it's like, hey, all we gotta do is have one hostage on our hands and we will be able to last and live forever. Like, we don't want to do that.
This is the way to do death and destruction for the sake of death and destruction. It's collective punishment. It's genocide against Palestinians, and the world has to speak out. So my way is not pleasant either. It involves a lot of folks dying on both sides. I understand that. Those are super hard choices. But go find Hamas. Go find the hostages. Go rescue them instead of wantonly, indiscriminately, killing after killing. And let's be honest, when you drop a bomb and a kid's head explodes and a grandmother is incinerated, that is terrorism. Killing 3 times as many civilians as Hamas is terrorism. And
do we know? Dropping bombs alone is not terrorism that I know of. Doesn't terrorism have a very strict definition where it's like committing acts of violence in an effort to like terrorize people or something? The FBI actually has a definition of terrorism here. So we've got international terrorism. Violent criminal acts committed by individuals or groups who are inspired by or associated with designated foreign terror organizations or nations. Okay. So they have to be violent criminal acts. And I don't know that they're violent criminal acts to bomb a building that Hamas is using with human shields inside of them. I don't know. Domestic terrorism is violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences, such as those of political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature, which is not what's happening here. This is not for an ideology. This is in response to being attacked by terrorists. So I wouldn't call this terrorism.
It is the same if it is done by a government. Send in as many special forces as you got. We should send in whatever you got to actually do the job at hand.
When he says we, is he talking about the United States or is he talking about Israel?
Instead of what Netanyahu is doing, which is to kill these people, to what? Send a message. And think about how unrealistic that is. And think about why his method has a 0% chance of working. How are the Palestinians supposed to rise up against Hamas? How would they prove they're against Hamas? Hamas ended all elections. Hamas ended democracy. So
this is actually something that I've thought about, because I have heard rhetoric being like, oh, the Palestinians should turn over the Hamas people to Israel. And I thought about this today because it made sense to me when I heard it, but I thought about this today and I'm like, you know what? Hamas is stealing food and water from the civilians, basically, right? What makes you think that the Palestinians have more resources in order to fight back against the Hamas individuals and turn them over to Israel? A Palestinian could want to turn over Hamas to Israel, but they know that they're going to get gunned down the instant they even make a move.
How are the Palestinians supposed to cry uncle? They're already crying uncle, but it's never enough for the bloodthirsty Netanyahu. No, more death of Palestinians, more babies killed. That's what his answer is. And it's this, and the United States of America.
This is extremely disingenuous because it makes it seem like his goal is to kill babies in Palestine, which is laughably cartoonish. And I understand, I guess, if you watch his content, you probably agree that, Bibi Netanyahu, he loves killing babies, which is kind of silly. But this characterization, I'm surprised that Piers Morgan isn't even calling it out.
America, I'm running for president here. There's no way in the world I would allow this. Sending $105 billion. And it doesn't even go to Israel, Ukraine, or Taiwan. It goes to the defense contractors that bribe these greedy American politicians and then get most of that money.
Okay, but what about giving money to Iran? Do you condemn that as well? When, the sending of money to Iran was very closely correlated with the terrorist attack that Hamas perpetrated against the Israelis.
And so the long-term answer is 1967 borders and the biggest walls you've ever seen in your entire life.
It's interesting. I've heard 1967 borders referenced before. I think maybe on a Destiny stream. So maybe there's some consensus on what the borders of Israel and Palestine should be. And if that's true, that's a good thing, because the only response I've heard is from the river to the sea, which is not a solution. At least not a solution that doesn't end the genocide of Jews.
Side, but the Palestinians get their state. It is unconscionable for them not to get their state. And if you're a moral person, of course you believe that the Palestinians are not the only people in the world that cannot govern themselves. If you say that, you are being, by definition, bigoted and a racist. We have to have two-state solution immediately.
You don't have to have a two-state solution. I think both sides hate each other so much that, or at least the Palestinians hate the Jews so much. I think that there are Jews who hate Palestinians, but not as many as there are Palestinians who hate Jews. But you have enough people there where if you have a two-state solution, it's just going to look like this. This is the two-state solution. So if you want a two-state solution, you got it. Stop complaining. But if this idea that Palestine has the right to self-govern, doesn't that kind of justify everything that's happening? Because they have self-governed by electing Hamas as the leaders of their government. You do realize, Hamas is the government of Gaza. It's true. So this is self-governance at play here, right? Now, I have heard, Hamas is a terrorist organization. They might have pressured some of the civilians into supporting them politically when they ordinarily would not have. But I think the fact of the matter remains that the majority of Palestinians at least like Hamas better than they like Israel. So, of course, they would rather support Hamas than Israel in this situation, in this conflict, in this war. Yeah, so, the idea that, self-governing, the Palestinians self-governing would look much different than it looks now with them electing Hamas into their government, I think that's a little bit faulty, to be honest.
If 56 years of occupation and brutalizing these people is not enough. Is 57 years going to be enough? Is 156 years going to be enough? I'm asking Israel, not out of hate, out of love. So many of my friends that I grew up with are Jewish. This is not good for them. This is not good for anybody. Please look into your hearts, look and be the moral people that I know you can be. I've been to Passover dinners where you pray for your oppressors. Now, it breaks my heart, but I got to tell you, you got to pray for those you are oppressing. And to say that you are not oppressing the Palestinians after brutalizing them for 56 long years, you're kidding yourself. And as a friend and an ally, I'm trying to get you to wake up and snap out of this trance. You cannot keep doing this. It is ruining your moral fiber.
Also, why isn't Piers Morgan pushing back on any of this? Because there are some arguments that he's making that could be pushed back upon if he wanted to.
Cenk, Uygur, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. I'm sorry it was your first appearance on this program under these circumstances, but I hope it won't be your last. I think you're an important voice in this, and I do appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Interesting. Wow. The interesting thing about this, too, is I've noticed in the comment sections of Piers Morgan's videos, they all seem to be against Piers himself, criticizing his take on the conflict in the Middle East. And I think part of it is the show is British, and I think in Britain there are many, many pro-Palestinian sentiments, in part due to the immigration of various Muslims into the country. So there are lots of pro-Palestinian sentiments there. You've seen the BBC even carry fake news propagated by the Hamas government. Let's see. Yeah, at least here it says, "Thank you, Piers, for having him on." That's good. That's good. But this is the first video that I've seen where the commentators liked what Piers Morgan. They've liked what was in the clip, but to be fair, Piers Morgan didn't actually really say anything. He just sat there. But yeah, I mean, the tough thing is there aren't really any easy answers. You could offer quick responses, but none of them are easy. And there are very rarely easy answers to war, whether it's how it's done or how you win the enemy.